We're going to finish Ezra here. We're in Ezra chapter 9 and 10. This is the end of Ezra, and we'll pick up Nehemiah. And the last part of Ezra is a little bit of a tricky passage. If you know anything about Ezra, or have read through Ezra, it's when me and Pat made the schedule, we just kind of just threw me on there at one point, and I thought, oh, Ezra 9 and 10, okay. And I read through it. I was like, I got Ezra 9 and 10, okay, all right. So for those who don't know about Ezra 9 and 10, it's a passage about divorce. It's a passage where they realize a bunch of Israelites and leaders and leaders in the Israelite community and priests, Levite priests, had married foreign women, and these foreign women, they have to figure out what to do, and by the end of it, they decide they have to send the foreign women home. They have to divorce them, essentially, and send them away. And at first glance, when I first read it, it sounds a little challenging to me. It's like, was this breaking up families? You know, we know God isn't a God who wants divorce. When Jesus is asked about divorce, he says it wasn't what was intended to happen. It wasn't, he quotes Genesis and says that was the intention, and divorce was not what was intended. And so it's a little bit of a tricky passage, but there's some things we can understand from it. And I think there's some tragedy in this, but there's also the faithfulness of God and the love of God in this. And when we really understand what's going on here, I think it makes it a little more clear. So with that, we're going to start with the first five verses here. I'm just going to kind of read them section by section and try to build some context and some understanding in what exactly is going on here, because it's a little bit more than just, oh, these people are from different places, so we were told we can't marry people outside of the Jewish family, so they have to go. It's a little bit more going on here. So let's read verses 1 through 5. After these things had been done, the officials approached me and said, the people of Israel and the priests and the Levites have not separated themselves from the people of the lands with their abominations. From the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, the Jebusites, the Ammonites, the Moabites, the Egyptians, and the Amorites. For they have taken some of their daughters to be wives for themselves, and for their sons, so the holy race has mixed itself with the people of the lands. And in this faithlessness, the hand of the officials and chief men has been foremost. As soon as I heard this, I tore my garments and my cloak, and I pulled hair from my head and beard and sat appalled. Then all who trembled at the words of the God of Israel, because of the faithlessness of the returned exiles, gathered around me, and while I sat appalled until the evening sacrifice. At the evening sacrifice, I rose from fasting with my garment and my cloak torn, and fell upon my knees and spread out my hands to the Lord my God. All right, we'll stop right there. So Ezra has a pretty intense reaction when he hears this. He hears, and it's chief most among the priests and the officials and the chief men are the foremost. That's who have done it the most. And Ezra, he tears his garment. He pulls hair from his head and his beard. I don't think I've ever been so appalled or grieved that I've pulled hair from my head. But he is struck with grief and anger, all kind of mixed together, it seems. And this is a big deal. And we might wonder why. Well, this does relate to a commandment that they would have known, and they probably would have either heard or been told stories of the faithlessness of Israel. So that's key. It's the faithlessness of the people of Israel. And they've probably been hearing stories about that all their lives, because why are they in exile? It's because of the faithlessness of Israel. It's because they did not turn towards the Lord so the many times he reached out to them. And he's probably heard the many stories of their forefathers, of Solomon and David, pillars, right? Great men who also weren't great men. Men who ultimately were flawed and did things that then hurt the nation of Israel and put them on this path. They've probably heard the stories of the patriarchs of Isaac and Jacob and of Abraham, who were also pillars in the faith, yet also did things that deviated from God's plan. So I think all that built up, hearing this, is just the idea of the faithlessness. Ezra knows how bad that is, because that's why they were in exile. That's why they've gone through so many things. I want to look at Exodus 34 real quick, where it's one of the first commandments we get with this idea of staying away from the people of the lands. So in Ezra 34, 11 through 16, it says, "Observe what I command you this day. Behold, I will drive out before you the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, the Jebusites. Take care lest you make a covenant with the inhabitants of the land to which you go, lest it become a snare in your midst. You shall tear down their altars and break their pillars and cut down their Asheraim. For you shall worship no other God, for the Lord whose name is jealous is a jealous God. Lest you make a covenant with the inhabitants of the land, and when they whore after their gods and sacrifice to their gods, and you are invited to eat of his sacrifice, and you take of their daughters of your sons, and their daughters whore after their gods, and make your sons whore after their gods." Some intense language there. And this is actually consistent language throughout the Old Testament of this idea of what idolatry means. It's not simply the idea that we worship another god. They seem to add a sense to it that it's a really intense thing. He's using the word that they're whoring after their gods. This has almost a sexual understanding to it. It's more than just, they just worship. It's bad to do idolatry because it's more than just a simple worshiping act. It's gonna change us spiritually. It's gonna change us where we go in life, how we follow the Lord. Idolatry takes us away from that. So that would be their understanding. And there's a couple other commandments they get with that kind of, and throughout the prophecies of Isaiah and Jeremiah, Israel gets described as the great harlot, as a thing that goes after other gods, that isn't faithful in any way. And so when Ezra hears this, he must be reminded of stuff like this. They don't have all of the Old Testament. They don't find it all. They probably found the Torah, right? And they have teachings from this. But they know the stories. And it's important to remember, it's not just, again, it's not people from different places. It's the people of the lands with their abominations. And then he lists the Canaanites, the Hittites, the same people that were listed all the way back in Exodus. Their abominations. And that's also strong language, but it's precise language. Because what the worshiping of other gods would have meant to Israel, would have meant to God, is an abomination. And there's an important point here to think of when we hear the idea of gods in the Old Testament. There's Elohim, that's God's plural. El is the name, or is the singular for God, and also the name used for God outside of Yahweh. He's also called El sometimes. And that's just their word for God. And Elohim is that word, but plural. And so you'll get, a lot of times in the Old Testament, you'll get capital G and you'll get lowercase g. You'll see that a lot, little g's. And so when they think of Baal, which was a very prominent god around this time, or I think it was like Azure, which was another god around this time, they believe they're real, but not like Yahweh. Yahweh is the highest. Yahweh is the greatest. There is no God like Yahweh. They believe it's real because they believe it's a spiritual being behind this idea. A fallen angel, if you will, a demon that has gone into other nations and kind of conjured up worship for itself. And there's actually an interesting discovery they found from a site called the Ugarit, or Ugaritz, something like that. I can't pronounce it properly. It's north of Israel, but it's a temple that they found. And in it, the language they found in this temple, they found in the 1930s, I believe. This language is very similar to Hebrew. It's like almost identical in its grammar and its structure. It's a Semitic language, very similar to Hebrew. And that they found a religion in that temple. They found clay tablets that told of a religion, and that religion was about two gods, El and Baal. And they were co-gods, and they ruled together, and El was a little higher than Baal, but he ruled through Baal. Well, if you look through the Old Testament, we get a god that pops up a lot that they worship, and his name's Baal. And Baal is, the worshipers of Baal, if you know the stories of Elijah, he's constantly fighting with those guys. The great story of setting the stones on fire, where they stack up a little stone tower, and they say, our God can set it on fire, and he's like, my God can set it on fire, and they're worshiping for hours and hours, and their God isn't doing anything. And Elijah says, is he sleeping? Are you worshiping loud enough? Maybe he's asleep. And then he calls for Yahweh to do it, and God just sets the stone pillar on fire. So Baal is a prominent god that appears in the Old Testament of worshipers of him who pop up a lot. And there's temples, they found temples that aren't that far from Jerusalem of this god. Only, like a handful of miles away that existed thousands of years ago. And so when they think of the abominations of these different peoples, it's not just, they worship a different, or they do different things, but they're worshiping different gods. And that's an abomination to the Lord, for he is a jealous God. Rightly so, because who else should be worshipped but Yahweh? Not lesser beings, not spiritual beings that he created, that then try to take the name of God. And we also see this idea in Daniel. If you've read through Daniel, there's a part where Daniel talks to an angel. And the angel tells him he was delayed by the prince of Persia. And so the idea there is that there's a spiritual being in Persia, and they call him prince, which means like a ruler or an authority. Was he ruling over Persia? Was he the one who, was this being the thing that they worship? We don't fully know, but this angelic being was delayed by it. And so there's this idea that these spiritual beings that are attached to these gods. These gods are more than just, it's not that they're fake, but they are real in the sense that they're spiritual beings that are behind these things. So it's a little more intense. It's a little deeper than just, it's just a fake God. You're actually giving yourself to something. You might be opening yourself up to a demonic force. And especially if there is a spiritual being over Persia, like this angel was delayed, they're being sent out of Persia. They're exiles coming out of Persia. So that's part of the idea. It's they are to separate themselves from the abominations, and the worship of some of these gods were abhorrent. The Canaanites did child sacrifice to worship their god. And if you've read through Judges, you can see how those abominations got intertwined with the Jewish faith. There's a story in Judges of a father sacrificing his daughter to Yahweh, and that is not what God ever commands us to do. And so that's why it's so serious about this, or why this is such a big deal, why Ezra is so appalled, because it's a little more than just worshiping some stone tablet or some wood carving. This is the downfall of Israel every single time, is idolatry. Going after other gods, going after things that aren't the creator of the universe, that aren't Yahweh, going after things that he created and worshiping them like they're gods. So I think that gives us some understanding of why this is such a big deal to Ezra. So let's go to verses 6 and 9. So he falls down on his knees, I spread out my hands to the Lord my God, saying, O God, I am ashamed, and blush to lift my face to you. And my God, for our iniquities have risen higher than our heads, and our guilt has mounted up to the heavens. From the days of our fathers to this day we have been in great guilt. And for our iniquities we, our kings and our priests, have given into the hands of the kings of the lands, to the sword, to captivity, to plunder, and to utter shame, as it is today. But now, for a brief moment, favor has been shown by the Lord our God to leave us a remnant and to give us a secure hold within his holy place, that our God may brighten our eyes and grant us a little reviving in our slavery. For we are slaves, yet our God has not forsaken us in our slavery, but has extended to us his steadfast love before the king of Persia, to grant us some reviving, to set up the house of God, to repair its ruins, and to give us protection in Judea and Jerusalem. So, there it is. He feels the sin, not just of where they're at right now, but of the generations. Ezra sees the iniquities that pile up past their head. He feels that they've mounted up to heaven in their iniquities. That's very, hyperbole, but it gives us the idea of how great he's feeling the weight of what they've done. And it doesn't say Ezra ever married someone who was a foreigner, someone who brought in other gods. It doesn't say Ezra was a part of this, yet Ezra isn't excusing him of this. He's putting himself within this. And he acknowledges that everything they have right now is from God. For a brief moment, favor has been shown by the Lord our God, by Yahweh our God. And that's, again, important, that this is their God. This is Yahweh, the God of the universe, the highest, most being in all creation, the one who created everything. It's really, really important, just think of if he's listing all these other times that they had sinned, all the other ideas and mythologies that would have been wrapped up when they came out of Egypt, and now coming out of Persia and Babylon, all these different cultures that brought in mythologies that would make them think to believe other gods. They have to remember Yahweh, our God, has given them this, and they're just a remnant. They're not all of Israel. They're just a remnant. Yet he fully acknowledges that their guilt is what got them here today. And he says, for we are slaves, yet our God has not forsaken us in our slavery, but has extended to us his steadfast love before the king of Persia. He's a God of steadfast love. He's a faithful God. He does not forsake. And that's huge because, this is hundreds and hundreds of years that he would be referencing in these couple verses of their iniquities and the guilt that has been mounting up towards the heavens. Yet through all of that, God is still faithful. He persuaded the Persian king. He moved the Persian king, and that king let his people go as a remnant to Israel. And all of this is because of God, not because of what they did. And as Ezra's rightly saying, look, we're still faithless. Even after everything you did, we're still causing problems. But because of God's faithfulness and his steadfast love, and I think that's key. I think what we see through all of Ezra, and what we see throughout the scripture, is God's faithfulness. That is a key part of who he is. He is faithful to his people, no matter how faithless they are. Let's continue to verses 10 and 15. And now, O our God, what shall we say after this? For we have forsaken your commandments, which you commanded by your servant the prophet, saying, the land that you are entering to take possession of it, it is a land impure with impurity of the peoples of the land, with their abominations, that they have filled it from end to end with their uncleanness. Therefore, do not give your daughters to their sons, neither take their daughters for your sons, and never seek their peace or prosperity, that you may be strong and eat good of the land, and leave it for inheritance to your children forever. And after all that has come upon us for our evil deeds and our great guilt, seeing that you, our God, have punished us less than our iniquities deserved, and have given us such a remnant as this, shall we break your commandments again and intermarry with the people who practice these abominations? Would you not be angry with us until you consumed us, so that there should be no remnant, not any to escape. O Lord, the God of Israel, you are just, for we are left a remnant that has escaped, as is today. Behold, we are before you in our guilt, for none can stand before you because of it. Oof. So there it goes. He quotes as the prophets have said. It's a little, and he says the similar thing that we read in Exodus. And I think it's key, the abominations of the land. He says in verse 13 or 14, shall we break your commandments again and intermarry with peoples who practice these abominations? So again, it's not about, you married someone from Texas and you're Minnesota. Like, what are you doing? No, it's not about, where exactly they're from, but it's about what they bring with them, the foreign gods that they bring with them. It reminds me a lot. I mean, growing up, I maybe you guys had something similar or told your kids similar. For those of you who have kids, you should date someone who's a believer. If you're gonna get married and if you're gonna pursue marriage, you should find someone who's a believer. You shouldn't date someone who's not a believer. That's what I was always kind of told growing up. And that's what we did. I did. I met my wife. We're both believers. But I think there's a similar idea going on here. I mean, why would we kind of warn our kids about dating and maybe marrying someone who's an unbeliever? I think it's because there's a chance that you may become an unbeliever too. I mean, there's a chance that they might become a believer, but if they're not committing to that from the get-go, from the beginning, then there's a chance that you might steer away from the path of God, that they either intentionally or unintentionally will steer you away. Again, this idea of foreign wives, that means that they actually didn't choose Yahweh. That didn't just mean, they come from another place, that they didn't choose to follow God, that they didn't have that kind of arrangement set up. And again, Ezra doesn't excuse himself. He puts himself with the people. He's their leader. He's taking responsibility for this. We all have leadership opportunities in our lives. Some are in bigger leadership roles than others. But it's the fault of the people doesn't excuse that. The leader says, I didn't do nothing. I'm fine. No, we're also a part of that. And so, again, it's a intense thing he's describing. I mean, he's quoting that, don't give our daughters to their sons, and we aren't supposed to take daughters for our sons. We should never seek their peace or prosperity, which sounds a little different than I think what Jesus tells us, to seek peace to love our enemies, right? And to pray for our enemies. Does this feel, in contradiction to that? I don't think so. I think this is a bit more political idea to it. Don't make peace treaties. And if you look at Solomon's life and the many, many treaties he made with many nations, he mostly did those through marriage and married many wives. And that led to the downfall of Israel. And they brought their gods with them. So I think it has that kind of idea of what does this peace and prosperity really look like. It doesn't say, never, just never do anything with them, never look at them, just stay away from them. But God is making a set-apart people. We are supposed to be separate from the world. And so in this sense, as the nation of Israel, they need to be careful on what they're doing with their peace treaties and their covenants they make with other people. And so after all this, he's saying that they don't deserve the forgiveness of God. But God is just. And so he allowed them to escape. O Lord, the God of Israel, you are just, for we are left a remnant that has escaped. And Ezra doesn't even think a remnant of them should be left. Yet he believes God is just and merciful and steadfast in his faithfulness. That even through all they did, God left a remnant. And you'll see that idea in the New Testament. It's really interesting. Paul talks about the remnant that remains. So before we get into chapter 10 here, I want to dig into a little bit more of this idea of marriage and marrying people outside of the family of Israel. Because if you remember, one of the peoples that are listed there is the Moabites. And if you remember the story of Ruth, Ruth is a Moabite. So it seems a little odd there. It's like, wait, is no one supposed to marry any people outside of the Jewish people? Because Ruth is a Moabite who marries in and is listed in the line of David and then later in the line of Jesus. So Ruth is very much promptly put in genealogies, and that's important. They say, put Ruth in these genealogies, not, oh shoot, David has a Moabite in his genealogy, let's write that out, let's forget that. No, they put that, and they even have a book written about her. There's not a book written about every single person in David's genealogy, but there's a book written about Ruth. And there was a key verse that Ruth tells Naomi when their sons die and Naomi's going back to her people. She tells Ruth to go home, to go to your people, go to your family. For you shouldn't have anything to do with me. I'm just going to go back to my people. And Ruth says, your God is my God. Your people are my people. That's, I think, essential for understanding how kind of marriage would have worked. If they were marrying people from the Moabites and the Jebusites and the Amorites, the difference is how many of those people said that. How many of those marriages were someone coming over and following the God of Israel, following Yahweh? I think when it says foreign women, that means they didn't decide to follow Yahweh. They didn't say, your God is my God, your people are my people. And there's an interesting idea with the word Hebrew. To be a Hebrew the word means to pass over. And you kind of get this idea from when the Hebrews pass over the Jordan into the promised land. They pass from one life into a new life. They pass from where they had sojourned in the wilderness for a long time, and they pass over into the promise that God gave them, the promised land. And there's kind of like a literal sense there, but I think there's also a spiritual idea there that connects to the old and new creation. To be a part of the family of God is to pass from one way of life into the new way of life, into God's promised way of life. And Ruth did that. She said, I will follow your God. I won't bring my gods. We never get a story about her bringing idols or worshiping any other gods. She said, I will follow your God. And so that's what I believe in this scenario. Anyone who's not listed as an Israelite is anyone who said they will not follow Yahweh. It's the ones who said I want to keep my gods. I want to worship Ra, who's a god from Egypt, or Baal, or whatever they would have brought from Persia. That's what they wanted to keep. And we get a bit of a New Testament example. It's a little different. Paul doesn't deal with this issue exactly. But in 1 Corinthians chapter 7, I just want to look at a couple verses here. In verses 12 through 16. So he's giving like a whole list in chapter 7. It's kind of an interesting list to think about about marriage and what to do in different circumstances. And he says in verse 12, to the rest I say, I, not the Lord, that if any brother has a wife who is an unbeliever, and she consents to live with him, he should not divorce her. If any woman has a husband who is an unbeliever, and he consents to live with her, he should not divorce him. For the unbelieving husband is made holy because of his wife, and the unbelieving wife is made holy because of her husband. Otherwise your children would be unclean, but as it is, they are holy. But if the unbelieving parents separate, let it be so. In such cases, the brother or sister is not enslaved. God has called you to peace. For do you know, wife, whether you will save your husband? Or how do you know, husband, whether you will save your wife? So there, it's a little bit of a different scenario. It's about people who become believers, but one who are married and their spouse doesn't become believers. And interestingly, Paul does this a few times where he says, this is from me, not the Lord, which is always just kind of interesting to me. And he tells them that they should stay together if they consent to it. But if they part, then so be it. They are not enslaved. They can remarry. They are not bound to their wife or husband if they're separate. Because he says, how do you know, wife, whether you will save your husband, or how do you know, husband, whether you'll save your wife? So again, that brings me back to kind of how I grew up and the idea of dating and eventually marrying someone. They say, if you start dating an unbeliever, how are you going to know you're going to save them? You don't know that. And probably not the best reason to get into a relationship, to try to save the person's soul. But so Paul kind of gives us a principle here for what to do. It's definitely a different scenario than what's happening in Ezra. And Ezra is specifically trying to keep to commandments they were given from God. And Paul is trying to parse through what happens when one becomes a believer. So all that being said, what I really want to say, I want to keep hammering home, is that these are marriages where one person said, I will not follow Yahweh. I will not follow your God. And so they decide what's the best thing to do to keep to the commandments. Ezra decides that they should separate. And if we look now, verses 1 through 8. While Ezra prayed and made confession, weeping and casting himself down before the house of God, a very great assembly of men and women and children gathered to him out of Israel. For the people wept bitterly. And Shechaniah, the son of Jeheli, of the sons of Elam, addressed Ezra. We have women from the peoples of the lands, but even now there is hope for Israel in spite of this. Therefore, let us make a covenant with our God to put away all these wives and their children according to the counsel of the Lord. And those who tremble at the commandment of our God, let it be done according to the law. Arise, for it is your task, and we are with you. Be strong and do it. Then Ezra rose and made the leading priests and Levites and all Israel take an oath that they would do as had been said. So they took an oath. Then Ezra withdrew from them before the house of God and went to the chamber of Jehoiada, the son of Elishabi, where he spent the night, neither eating bread nor drinking water, for he was mourning over the faithlessness of the exiles. And a proclamation was made throughout all Judah and Jerusalem to all the returned exiles that they should assemble at Jerusalem, and that if anyone did not come within 3 days by order of the officials and the elders, all his property would be forfeit, and he himself banned from the congregation of the exiles. So now we say we have to do something about this. And again, Ezra is still mourning. He goes and fasts. He doesn't eat. He doesn't drink. He's mourning. He's weeping for the people of Israel. He's taking this very seriously. This is a massive thing. It's the faithlessness of the people. And so they say, all right, we're gonna call everyone to Israel or to Jerusalem to come and assemble at Jerusalem. And they have 3 days to do it. Israel, from where the nation is right now and what it would have been probably similar to at the time, isn't a huge place. So you could probably get to Jerusalem within 3 days, depending on where you were at. I always just think of with that of like the one guy who's like at the furthest southern tip, and he's like, oh shoot, I got to get there in 3 days, and he's just booking across the desert or something. I don't know exactly, but you could probably make the trip in 3 days. It doesn't seem an unreasonable amount of time. But it's so serious that if they don't, your property, what you were granted, is gone. You're not going to keep it if you don't come to this assembly for them to discuss and figure out what to do. And so they tell Ezra, let it be done according to the law. Arise, for it is your task. Which that's kind of tough, Poor Ezra, he's weeping over here, he's grieving, and the guys, the other chief priests or elders say, it's on you though. We agree this is bad, but you got to do it. We're not going to try to figure this one out. That's on you. Probably not meant that way, but that's how I first read it. I mean, they do say, we are with you. So be strong and do it. And then he rose and he goes and he fasts. So Ezra is weeping, and people gather and they weep bitterly. They all understand what's going on here. And I think it's important to know, too, they don't take this lightly in the sense of they don't think, oh, it's no big deal, let's move on. And, oh, it's a big deal, let's do something right away. They say, let us pray, let us weep, let us grieve, let us fast. They take their time to figure out what to do. And I think that's how you take something the most serious. That's how you understand the depth of a problem, the deepest, is whether you actually take the time to figure out what to do. And I think this is kind of an important point too, is that this is Israel following God the way they were supposed to. So many times throughout the Old Testament, Israel follows and then plummets, follows and then does it. This time, Israel truly follows the way that God wants them to live. And so in a way, kind of the story of the Old Testament, this is almost like the final act of a story where they finally hit their growth and they come to the Lord and they finally understand what it is they're supposed to do. I think we see Israel doing what they're supposed to. So now if we go into verse 9 to 17, we see, then all the men of Judah and Benjamin assemble at Jerusalem within 3 days. It was the 9th month on the 12th day of the month. And all the people sat in the open square before the house of God, trembling because of the matter and because of the heavy rain. And Ezra the priest stood up and said to them, you have broken faith and married foreign women, and so increased the guilt of Israel. And then make confession to the Lord, the God of your fathers, and do his will. Separate yourselves from the peoples of the land and from foreign wives. Then all the assembly answered with a loud voice, it is so, we must do as you said. But the people are many, and it is a time of heavy rain. We cannot stand in the open. Nor is this a task for 1 day or for 2, for we have greatly transgressed in this matter. Let our officials stand for the whole assembly. Let all in our cities who have taken foreign wives come at appointed times, and with them the elders and judges in every city, until the fierce wrath of God over this matter is turned away from us. Only Jonathan the son of Ashel and Jahaziah the son of Tikvah opposed this, and Meshullam and Shebathiah the Levite supported them. Then returned exiles did so. Ezra the priest selected men, heads of the fathers' houses, according to their father's house, each of them designated by the name. On the first day of the 10th month they sat down to examine the matter, and by the first day of the first month they had come to the end of all the men who had married foreign wives. Whew. Some of these names are a little tricky. So they gather in pouring rain. I mean, I don't know about you, but just about any event I've done outside, when it starts raining, we cancel. I've many Little League baseball games that it was like, nope, we're not going to play in the rain. Sometimes we did play in the rain. Or we postpone it till the rain stops, and then when it stops, we go back out and play. But most of the time, we cancel when it's heavy rain. Not just rain, not like a sprinkle, not just a little downpour, but heavy rain. And they were trembling because of the matter, and probably because they were freezing cold from the rain. So so Ezra says, you should separate yourselves from the people of the land and from the foreign wives. And all the assemble agree. And they say, but the people are many, and the time is of heavy rain. They're like, it's raining, man. Come on. Let's take a second. Let's really think about this. But they say, we need to take our time on this. There are many people in this scenario. And again, I think the separating yourselves from the people of the land is more than just, they're from the Moabites or something like that. It's separating from their gods. Worshipping other gods is a constant thing that happens in Israel. and it constantly destroys them. And their practices are abominations. Some of them are horrendous if you read into them, like child sacrifice or temple prostitution or other kind of things that are just brutal. But the core part of it is that it turns them away from God. It turns them to worship other things that aren't God, things that are lesser than God, things that are created by God. And so they took 3 months to review this matter. Again, this wasn't a simple, all right, you married someone from here, you married someone from there, get out of here. They sit down and they take 3 months to examine every single marriage. And I think the way I understand that is then they see some of these marriages, the women would have said, like Ruth said, your God is my God, your people are my people. And so when they finished examining this matter, they go into the list here in verses 18 through 44. I'm not going to read all those names because we're going to get a lot of butchered pronunciations. But he says in verse 18, now there were found some of the sons of the priests who had married foreign wives, and it goes on. Again, these were leaders, so that's another important part to know, that these were the leaders of Israel. They were examples. They were the one who were the trendsetters, for lack of a better term. They were the ones leading the people. There's such a high regard for leadership in the New Testament. I mean, you would hold me and Pat to high regards. If there's something we're doing that is pointing away from God, that would be a pretty big issue that we would be talked to about. It wouldn't be as simple like, well, they're in charge, so they can do this. They can, slide around this rule or something. No, they need to be held accountable for their actions. I should be held accountable. Pat should be held accountable. All in leadership should be held accountable for whether we are following God or whether we are doing something that turns us away from God. Because eventually that will affect the people they're leading. I'm sure you've heard the many stories of churches that have had tragic downfalls, and a lot of it's from the leadership, and that affects the people. So if leaders are in debacles or scandals or something like that, that is going to hurt the people they're leading. And then more people are going to point away from God. Just think of Solomon. Solomon's, I think, the perfect example for this scenario. What was it? It was 500 wives, and all of them from different places all brought their gods. And what happened to Israel, the next king? It falls apart. It splits. And there's constant division, and there's constant war, and there's constant walking away from the Lord. And that's the people. That's not just Solomon. Because of what Solomon's leadership did, it led the people of Israel away from the Lord. So we get all these names, and it counts to about over 100 names. I think I didn't count it, so don't exactly take my word for it. Google told me it was about 125 or something like that. So whether you trust Google AI or not, but it's about over 100. You don't get every name. You get some who are the sons of this person and sons of that person. So is that one person? Is that 5 people? We don't know. But it's about over 100 people, and thousands of exiles returned. So it's not, in a way, it is a small percentage of all the people that came. Yet it's still a grave matter, especially because many of them are in leadership roles. And there's another important idea here for a purely cultural point for Jewish heritage, is that Jewish heritage was through the mother. So if you had a Jewish mother, you were considered ethnically a Jew. Doesn't matter who your father was. Your father could have not been a Jew, could have not been from that land. So there is a piece here where this is important because the children, if they're going to be considered Jewish from a kind of societal point, is whether it's through their mother or not, the lineage through their mother. And again, if these are people who aren't following Yahweh, who does not desire to follow Yahweh, they would not be considered Jewish. Because we see Ruth be considered in David's lineage and considered Jewish, considered part of the family of God, because she followed Yahweh. And so that's why this is also important, and that's why they're pointing out the wives, because this is the Jewish heritage for the people. And they've been in exile for so long. So the Jewish heritage is really important, because this is part of their identity. And we can kind of see it here, and you'll see it really in the New Testament, where the identity is very much a physical thing, not just the spiritual, the idea that we're all part of the family of God, right? All adopted into this. But at this point, it's also it's a society, it's a country, it's a physical identity, which does later lead to some of the downfalls we see in the New Testament, where they're so focused on this identity that they actually lose what made them this, what made them an Israelite, what made them the name Israel, right? It means wrestle with God. And so they lose that. And so it ends, all these had married foreign women, and some of the women had even borne children. And other translations, there's a debate among this last verse. I don't exactly know why, but some translations will say, and they sent away their wives, or their wives. It sent away the married women they had, the foreign women they had married, and some of the women had even borne children, and they sent them away. So there's a little bit different. Bibles will translate that either with they sent them away or not, and I can't remember, or I don't really know why there's a difference there. But if they did send them away, which is what Ezra is saying, you must separate from them, they would have just sent them back to their families. It wouldn't have just been abandoned. They would have gone back to live with their families. And it still would have probably been difficult, but that seems to be the sacrifice they're making to follow Yahweh, to follow the God of the universe. So what can we learn from this? It's a tricky passage for me still, even with some of that understanding, even with that context of the seriousness of why it's dangerous, of bringing this idolatry in and worshiping idols, and why that's so destructive. And we see it throughout all of the Old Testament. And one thing I think I see here is that Ezra kind of reminds us in chapter 9 is that God is faithful in his steadfast love to the people of Israel. Even in everything they've done, they're still here. They get released from their exile, and they get to go home, and they can build a new temple to him. And we see it later in the New Testament that he sends his Savior for all people, and he dies on the cross for us, and he rises again. So I think the faithfulness of God here, his faithful, steadfast love is on display. That the moment he saw that they were transgressions in this way, he didn't just say, all right, you're done. We tried to get a remnant out here, and it's not working. He's at peace with them. He's waiting for them. He's giving them time. He's patient with them. So I think it's just important to remember the faithfulness of God and his steadfast love. It endures forever. It endures the entire history of Israel and is still faithful. And I think the sins of the people we see here, the sins of the people are part of the responsibility of the community. It's not just, Steve sinned, and so we just got to, brush it off. It's just Steve's deal. We all are individually accountable, but if we are a community, the Israelites were a group of thousands of people at this point. They're a remnant, but there's a lot of them, but they took responsibility for this. Of only a couple hundred people. I mean, that's a lot of people, but in the grand scheme of how many were there, it's not a huge number, but they took responsibility for this. This was a big deal for all of them, not just one person, not just the couple that had, the people who had married, but all of them have to get together. They mourned, they wept, and they got together to figure out what to do. And I think we get an idea here of don't be unequally yoked with unbelievers. That's 1 Corinthians chapter, or 2 Corinthians, chapter 6. Paul tells us to not be unequally yoked with unbelievers. For what does righteousness have to do with unrighteousness? What does light have to do with darkness? He says, what accord has Christ with Belial? Or what portion does a believer share with an unbeliever? What agreement has the temple of God with idols? For we are temples of the living God. So he's given us an idea there of don't be unequally yoked. Don't be weighed down by non-believers. He's not saying don't be in relationship with them at all, but how much are we being unequally yoked? Because what does Christ have with another God? What agreement has the temple of God with idols? It doesn't. Righteousness has nothing with lawlessness. What fellowship has light with darkness? It doesn't. And so I think we see an idea here of being unequally yoked, of what that destruction causes. And if you look through all of Israel's history, you see that destruction constantly. But the biggest thing I took to remember from this, from Ezra's example, is he took his sin to God. He took his people's sin to God. It wasn't fear. It wasn't he just sat down, what should I do? He instantly, after he heard it, he mourned, he ripped his clothes, he tore hair out, and then he went and he prayed before God. So he took it to God. He took all this to God. He didn't figure it out on his own. He didn't get the people together, let's figure this out on our own. No, he sat down and he prayed. So I think those are things we can remember. God's love is faithful. It endures forever. And that as a community, I mean, obviously we're a smaller community than Israel, but I think we have responsibility for each and every one of us. And we shouldn't be unequally yoked, and we should remember to take our sin to God, because he's faithful and his love endures forever. If you'd pray with me. Father, I thank you for this day. I thank you for your word, Lord. I thank you that you are faithful, Lord, that your love endures forever, that you have not forsaken us. Lord, I pray that we would remember that. We would remember that you are reaching out to us, that you want us to come to you with our sin and with our guilt, and you want to lift us up, and you want to bring us back in relationship with you. And so, Lord, I pray that we just remember that in our weeks, in our months, in our years to come. That if there's ever times that we become unequally yoked, if there's ever times that we stray away, if there's ever times that we suddenly are being caught in some kind of idolatry, worship almost of something else, that we would remember that we can just come back to you. That we don't have to hide like Adam and Eve, that we don't have to try to decide what to do on our own and make up our own ideas for things like Abraham or many people before us, Lord. But like some of those people, that we can have faith in you and we can be led by you and we can trust in you. So I pray for that in our lives, Lord, that we don't forget about that. That we remember that you are a faithful God whose steadfast love endures forever.